What is going on, sports fans? Happy holidays, and thank you so much for tuning in. We have another episode of Fantasy Haus Live. This time we got playoff action coming straight at you this week. It was the first round of our playoffs, so we will have just a little bit of change in our schedule. So pretty much, since there are no power rankings really anymore, since the standings are pretty much locked, and now it's just all up to the fate of the fantasy football gods and whatnot during our playoffs. So pretty much what we're going to do this week is we're going to do the weekly review of the just pretty much the actual playoff bracket, which is, I guess, will be our winners bracket and our losers bracket, aka the people that didn't make it into the playoffs. And then we'll pretty much skip what would be our normal sit standings because we don't really have them, and then we'll go straight into review or our preview of the next week, which should have the winners bracket, winners consolation bracket, and finally the losers bracket. So since we got a decent amount to cover, let's get right into the action. So like I said, we are going to start with some of these playoff brackets. We're going to start with the winners bracket and then continue on through. Here we go. So this is how round one actually turned out, and it was actually Champ Cheese pulling off an upset against Bob's Burgers that had been surging as of late by a score of 135.35 to 90. And in which case, with the victory over Bob's Burgers, this means now Champ Cheese has to defend his crown against the number one overall top dog in the league, who has been straight up killing it, who I don't think anyone expected this big of a leap from last year, was Team Nugent. So that's a huge surprise, and it's going to be a hell of a match there. Then in our second winners bracket matchup, it's CeeDeez Nuts getting a huge upset over what had been a long-standing top dog in Destinooooo, knocking him down to the consolation bracket with a score of 131 to 122. And CeeDeez Nuts will now face The-Cheetah Hill in the second round, which I know we're kind of like previewing, but you know how we do previews. We'll go into a little bit more of a breakdown as well. And then in our losers bracket, we had Team Breeki picking up the win over the Chicago Deviants by a score of 90 to 40. And then in our other losers bracket match, we saw the Bajayjays getting a win over the Lame Tanks by a score of 152 to 141. And that's kind of how the overall overview for the week shakes out. So now we would take a deeper look into how these matchups kind of broke down, starting with our first matchup, which was Champ Cheese taking down the Bob's Burgers. At the top, we saw Ryan Tannehill able to get, 12 points in the loss to the Chargers. I actually believe he ended up getting injured in that game and had to leave due to ankle injury, I believe. Then across the, did he finish the game? I can't remember actually with Tannehill, because I know he's out. He's done for the season. Yeah. So he went out for one series. Okay, it's like I remember watching that game, seeing him go out for a little bit, and then he came back. So Tannehill was only able to get 12 points despite losing to the Chargers. While for Bob's Burgers, Jared Goff was able to get 16 points in the win over the Jets. Then in the first set of running backs for Bob's Burgers, Najee Harris had a very productive day with getting 14 points in the win over Carolina, while Dalvin Cook had himself a day in that comeback win over Indianapolis, scoring 16 points. Then staying with Champ Cheese and Saquon Barkley in the next set of running backs had 23 points in the win over Washington, while Jamal Williams was only able to get 3.3 points, as he has kind of been lost in the that backfield there in the win over the Jets. Then in our wide receiver one matchup, just going to stay with Bob's Burger here, Keenan Allen able to get 16 points in that win over Tennessee. Well, if we take a look at Champ Cheese in Justin Jefferson, who also just continues to produce and be one of the best wide receivers in the league, getting 30 points in that win over Indy. Like I said, that was a huge comeback, the biggest in NFL history, if I remember correctly. In the next set of wide receivers, we'll just stay with Champ Cheese here. Devontae Smith continuing to have an amazing season. I think that's just more of just product of how well the Eagles have been doing. Able to get 17 points in that win over Chicago, while Christian Kirk for Bob's Burgers only able to get 15 points. I want to say only 15 points is actually very good. in the 40-30 win over Dallas. Then in our battle of the tight ends, Dalton Schultz for Champ Cheese only able to get 3 points in that loss to Jacksonville, while TJ Hawkinson able to get a modest 8.3 in the win over Indianapolis. Then in our flex spot, GJ Chark for Bob's Burgers only able to get 2.8 points, while Christian Watson finally saw his touchdown streak end, able to get a pretty modest 8 points in the win over the Rams. Then the defenses, it was looking pretty bleak for the Vikings, who had the Colts had jumped to a 33-0 lead, but then they stormed back, so actually they were able to get 4 points, while the Niners actually had themselves a pretty decent day against Seattle, able to get 10 points in their win. And then finally, we go into our matchup with the kickers, where Justin Tucker only able to get 3 points in that loss to Cleveland, while Jason Myers was able to get 9 points, continuing to be one of the best kickers and most accurate kickers in the league this year, able to get 9 points in that loss to San Francisco. Now, if we shift gears a little bit into our next matchup, in which case we saw CeeDeez Nuts get the win over Destinooooo, and it was another upset, because like I said, Destino had been a lock for a top dog for pretty much the entire season. And we are going to see how exactly things broke down. So, if we start with our QBs, in Tua and Mahomes, we'll start with Mr. CD here. Tua was only able to get 20 points in the loss to Buffalo, while Patrick Mahomes continuing to have an MVP-like season, threw up 36 in the big win over Houston, which everyone was pretty much expecting that. Then in our first set of running backs, staying with Destino, Nick Chubb only able to get 9 points, probably the first time we've seen him go under 10 in a while. Able in that win over Baltimore, while Joe Mixon able to get 10.4 in the win over Tampa Bay. Then staying with CeeDeez Nuts in their second matchup of running backs, we have James Conner able to get 18 points, so a pretty big day out of him in the loss to Denver, while Josh Jacobs continuing to have an amazing season, showing he got that dog in him with 13 points in that win over New England. Then in wide receiver one matchup, we'll just stay with Destino as we'll kind of alternate back and forth here. Adam Thielen able to get 13 points in that win over Indy, while that whole Vikings team just exploded in that second half. Then for CD, DeAndre Hopkins able to get 13 points, and I think even in that loss to Denver, they had two different quarterbacks. So it was Trace McSorley and Colt McCoy. And I think Colt McCoy has a concussion, so it's just going to be Trace McSorley. But oof. Then in our next set of wide receivers, staying with CD, we have Garrett Wilson able to get 13 points in that loss to Detroit, while Jerry Jeudy able to get 14 points in the win over Arizona. So I think there was also a game that saw Russell Wilson go down and had their backup in, so he was actually producing with both QBs. Then in our tight end matchup, Tyler Conklin only able to get 1.9 points in that loss to Detroit, while Travis Kelce continuing to have that amazing repertoire. He himself is also having himself what looks like to be an MVP season, getting 20 points in the win over Houston. Then if we go into the flex spot, Zay Jones had himself a day. I don't think anyone had Zay Jones going off for the 34 points that he did in that big win over Dallas. If you look at Brandon Ayuk, I mean, obviously he's not going to compare much to that when he only got 3.9 points in the win over Seattle. Then in the defense spot, the Eagles had a very good productive day against the Bears when they got their win. The Eagles also had a pretty modest day for defense, getting 8 points in the loss to Cleveland. Then finally, Evan McPherson had 9 points in the win over Tampa, while Harrison Butker only able to get 3 points in the win over Houston. Then if we shift into our first losers bracket match, or consolation bracket, in which case Team Breeki got the win over the Deviants. So starting at the top, as you can see, Jalen Hurts able to get 37 points in that big win over Chicago, while Lamar Jackson is not playing, so that's just a goose egg for the Deviants, and just a mistake on the Deviants for not setting their lineup, especially when they're in the playoffs. But I get it, consolation bracket, it is what it is. Anyways, then moving into our first set of running backs, we have Leonard Fournette scoring 11 points in the loss to Cincinnati for the Deviants, while for Team Breeki, Cam Akers, who's kind of having a resurgence towards this little second part of the season here, then again, the Rams are completely decimated by injuries. So, it's kind of he's just there. Able to get 13 points in the loss to Green Bay. Then if we stay with Team Breeki, Aaron Jones, able to get 20 points in the win over the Rams, while for the Chicago Deviants, Miles Sanders only able to get 1.9 points in the win over Chicago. Then in our first set of running backs, or of wide receivers, we have Robert Woods for the Deviants shooting 3.2 points, while Stephon Diggs was able to get 10 points in the win over Miami. Then continuing straight into the next set of wide receivers and staying with Team Breeki and Davante Adams, getting 6.8 points in the win over New England. It was a shock win in overtime. I don't think anyone saw that weird turnover for a win coming. Then on the opposite side for George Pickens, he got 7.3 points in the win over Carolina. In the battle of the tight ends, Pat Fryermuth for Team Breeki threw up a goose egg, unfortunately, in that win over Carolina, while Hunter Henry it's still points, 2.9. It's not much, but it's points. Then in our flex spot, Allen Robinson also threw up a goose egg, as he pretty sure is on IR, and Michael Gallup only got 1.2 points in that loss to Jacksonville. Then in our defensive spot, the Rams, the Bills had -2 points in their winning effort over Miami, while the Rams threw up 7 points despite losing to Green Bay. And then finally, in our battle of the kickers, Daniel Carlson threw up 7 points in the win over New England, while Tyler Bass was only able to get 6 in the win over Miami. All right, and in our last matchup, it saw the Bajayjays getting the win over the kind of surging Lame Tanks. Josh Allen able to get 38 points for the Lame Tanks in that win over Miami, while for the Bajayjays, Kirk Cousins able to get 37 points, so there was actually pretty even scoreline for these two QBs here in that win over Indianapolis. Then in our first set of running backs, for Bajayjays, Derrick Henry went off for 26 points in the loss to the Chargers, while Jonathan Taylor went down with an injury and out for the season, only got 2.3 points in the loss to Minnesota. Then staying with the Lame Tanks, and DeAndre Swift able to get 12 points in the win over the Jets, while Elvin Kamara it was a modest stat line of 12.4 points in the win over Atlanta, but it's been a bit of a down year for him. Then in our first set of wide receivers, but starting with the Bajayjays, we have Michael Pittman Jr. getting 19 points in that loss to Minnesota, while Amari Cooper for the Lame Tanks able to get 9.8 points in the win over Baltimore. Then staying with Lame Tanks and Tyler Lockett able to get 13 points in the loss to San Fran, while Mike Williams for the Bajayjays able to get 10 points in the win over Tennessee. Then if we continue in two tight ends, but we'll stay with the Bajayjays and Gerald Everett getting 8.2 points, while George Kittle going off for 25 points in the win over Seattle. Then in our flex spot, DJ Moore for the Lame Tanks able to get 18 points in the losing effort to Pittsburgh, while Latavius Murray able to get 21 points, had himself a huge day in that win over Arizona for Denver. Then in the defense spot, the Packers defense against the Rams was able to get 13 points, while the Broncos against Arizona only able to get 12, so actually you have another even kind of stat line there. And then lastly, we have the battle of the kickers, in which case for the Lame Tanks, Matt Gay able to throw up 8 points, while Cameron Dicker for Tennessee was able to throw up 6 points for the Bajayjays. Okay, now we're going to move into our next section, which, like I said, we're skipping our power rankings because we don't really have them this week. They don't really matter as we are in the playoffs. So as of last week, those were our kind of final standings for, final power rankings. Now we're going to get into the second round of our playoffs, and we're going to start with the preview of our winners bracket. So round 2 is shaping up to be just a little bit different, in which case Champ Cheese is looking to take on the number 1 top dog in the league in Team Nugent, with Team Nugent sitting at a record of 10-4, while Champ Cheese is sitting at 7-7. Then in our second matchup of the second winners bracket matchup, It features CeeDeez Nuts taking on another fellow top dog in The-Cheetah Hill. CeeDeez Nuts sitting at a record of 6-8, while The-Cheetah Hill sitting at a record of 9-5. But as always, we're going to start back at the top with Champ Cheese and Team Nuge, which is going to be the first one that we're going to take a peek at and make some picks. We have Gardner Minshew and Philly taking on Dallas versus Trevor Lawrence, Jacksonville taking on the Jets. Well, Trevor Lawrence already threw up 20 points. Trevor Lawrence has been looking mighty fantastic along with them Jags. They're not the same team when Doug Marrone was there. In regards to the score, Trevor Lawrence already threw up 20 points. I was reading online, I think Gardner Minshew has only thrown up like at least 17 points per game the last time he was a starter. That is a very high-powered offense they got going there in Philly. So the weapons are there, but this is a very good Dallas defense that they're going against, so it could be very bad for them. Since this is Champ Cheese and this is my team, I do also want to point out that we do have Brock Purdy, but that could also be a tough play against Washington. But Purdy was going off, so we'll see. Maybe we'll have to make a switch at QB there, but we're not 100% sure yet. But in results to this specific QB matchup, I would say that I'd probably have to go with Trevor Lawrence having the better day if I was going to look at it against Trevor Lawrence versus Gardner Minshew. Then in our first set of running backs, we have Dalvin Cook in Minnesota taking on the Giants versus Christian McCaffrey in San Fran taking on Washington. You got to go with Christian McCaffrey, despite the fact that Washington's front defensive front line is actually very good. It's Christian McCaffrey, and the fact that San Francisco team is just so good, even with Brock Purdy under center, who the rookie has been doing very well. I think he's thrown for like over 400 yards and like no interceptions yet, knock on wood. But I think Christian McCaffrey might have the better stat line here. Although I would be not surprised if Dalvin Cook feasted on this Giants team. Then we go into the next set of running backs. We have Saquon and the Giants taking on Minnesota versus Tony Pollard and Dallas taking on Philly. I'm going to have to roll Saquon on this one just because we did see the Minnesota defense pretty much give up a bunch of yards to Indianapolis last week, despite when they came back. So I'm going to roll with Saquon still having a very good comeback season. Don't get me wrong, Tony Pollard's still probably going to eat, but this is a Philly defense that is actually very good and one of the best in the league right now. Then in our first set of wide receivers, we have Justin Jefferson in Minnesota taking on the Giants versus CeeDee Lamb and Dallas taking on Philly. Going to roll Justin Jefferson again on this one, as Justin Jefferson is just he's him. He's one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in the league. CD, don't get me wrong, he is very good, but I'm going to keep mentioning again that this is an Eagles team that is actually very good. This Eagles defensive team that is very good. Then in the wide receiver matchup, we have another two sets of Eagles. We have Devontae Smith in Philly taking on Dallas versus A.J. Brown in Philly taking on Dallas. Well, got to keep in mind that Gardner Minshew's throwing to him. Having said that, probably A.J. Brown will have the better day marginally. But who knows? The game script could have just, A.J. Brown be covered and Devontae Smith just has a day. We don't know. Or who knows? Maybe both of them and they'll just go Evan Engram. We'll see. But Evan Engram's on Jacksonville. What am I talking about? Or they'll go Goddard. But who knows? Then in our battle of tight ends, we have Dalton Schultz in Dallas taking on Philly versus Mark Andrews in Baltimore taking on Atlanta. Oof. Gotta go Mark Andrews here. Even though Lamar is not going to be, he's not starting, Mark Andrews is still a very good tight end, and the Atlanta defense is not quite that great. In our flex spot, we have Christian Watson in Green Bay taking on Miami versus Van Jefferson and the Rams taking on Denver. That Denver defense is one of the best in the league. Christian Watson also going against a very good defense in Miami. I think the last time Green Bay was in Miami, they won off that fake spike. So, and I will say Rodgers has historically played bad in Florida. I'm going to roll with Watson on this one. Only because I don't expect the Rams to be able to get much going against that Denver team. That Denver defense is going to be pretty damn good. Although Van Jefferson is like one of the only mouths left, or one of the only people left on that team, so they got to throw it to someone. Then in our battle of the defenses, we have the Buccaneers in Tampa taking on Arizona versus Cowboys in Dallas taking on Philly. That Philly team is good, but so is this Cowboys defense, and you're not going to start that. You're not going to not start the Cowboys defense. Buccaneers defense going against Arizona. I know the Bucs defense is also just took on a couple more injuries, but the Cardinals are going with, I think, Trace McSorley is their QB because Colt McCoy got injured as well. So, but I think but watch the Cowboys actually just have a field day on Gardner Minshew. It would be just my luck. Then in our third matchup, we have Graham Gano and and the Giants taking on Minnesota versus Nick Folk and New England taking on Cincy. I'm going to go with Graham Gano on this one because this game won't be played in the cold. It's going to be played in a dome, and I think that's going to be playing a huge factor in these games. Originally had Jason Myers, but switched to Graham Gano. This is going to be played in Minnesota in a dome, and Graham Gano is a very, very good kicker, and Minnesota gives up a lot of field goals to kickers at home for obvious reasons. They're in a dome. Then if you look across the way, you got Nick Folk. Even though they're going to be playing, I think that's going to be playing in. That's going to be playing in Foxborough. Yeah, it's going to be cold. That's going to be real cold. Yeah, we're going to go with Graham Gano on this one. Fantasy football gods, please. Want to retain my title. Might have to make some moves, but we'll see. Then in our second matchup, we have CeeDeez Nuts taking on The-Cheetah Hill in what is shaping up to be a very good matchup. And it seems like we already have some scores going on. Some very good plays. I'll show you all. So starting at the top, we have Tua and Miami taking on Green Bay versus Dak and Dallas taking on Philly. I think Tua's gonna have the better day, honestly. Even though we're a decent defense, but we got a bunch of injuries, and there's just a lot of weapons on that Miami team, as well as Jalen Waddle and Tyreek. Then we have Dak Prescott, who's taking on Philly, who, like I keep saying over and over this episode, Philly is actually good defense. In our first set of running backs, we have James Conner and Arizona taking on Tampa versus Austin Eckler and the Chargers taking on Indy. Gotta go Austin Eckler on this one. Tampa's defensive front isn't bad. They're a little banged up, but I think the muscle hamster and Austin Eckler is going to do better. Then in our next set of running backs, we have Jerick McKinnon and KC taking on Seattle versus Ramondre Stevenson and New England taking on Cincy. Ramondre Stevenson currently holds a questionable designation. And against Cincy, they've been playing pretty good. Jerick McKinnon been playing amazing as of late. Gonna have to go with Jerick McKinnon. I can't tell. I know Isaiah Pacheco fumbled for I think the fourth time this season, so he was being punished for that a little bit. But Jerick McKinnon has been making the most of his opportunities there. Then in our first set of wide receivers, we have DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona taking on Tampa versus Tyreek in Miami taking on Green Bay. Got to go with Tyreek. Yeah, at least he's got his number one QB throwing to him. And Tyreek is the fastest in the league, so we'll see if John Money, Jair Alexander actually shadows him, or if he's just we play a zone defense, so probably not. Sad face. Anyways, I would say DeAndre Hopkins, but he has Trace McSorley thrown to him, and most of his production before in last week's game came from Colt McCoy, who's now out, so that sucks. Then in the second set of wide receivers, we had Garrett Wilson and the Jets taking on Jacksonville, only able to get 5 points, while Amon-Ra St. Brown and the Detroit Lions take on Carolina. Well, the matchup is quite juicy for Amon-Ra here, so I'm going to roll with Amon-Ra because Carolina has been quite bad this season, and I think Amon-Ra is just going to feast on them. Then in the next set of the next matchup, we have the tight ends, which is Tyler Conklin and the Jets taking on Jacksonville, only able to get 7.4 points in that game, while Evan Engram, obviously playing in that same game, able to get 18 points in in that game, or in that win over the Jets. So it already has a slight head start, and that matchup has finished. Well, that position matchup. Then the flex spot, we got Joe Mixon and Cincy taking on New England versus Jalen Waddle and Miami taking on Green Bay. Ooh. I think... that's going to be hard to say, because both Jalen and Tyreek have been doing very well this season. But I think only one of them is going to have a good day. So we'll roll the dice and say Joe Mixon's going to have a slightly better day than Jalen Waddle in this matchup. Then in the defenses, we have the Browns taking on New Orleans versus Jaguars taking on the Jets, and they were looking at 13 points already. So Jags are going to be tough to beat. 13 points is huge coming out of a defense. Then in our kickers, we have Evan McPherson and Cincy taking on New England versus Brett Maher and Dallas taking on Philly. Dallas is. I think we'll probably have to go with Maher on this one. Fierce, because Evan McPherson's got to play in Foxborough, and that cold and the wind is not going to be good. Maher playing in nice Dallas. Yeah, I think that'll be a good game for Maher on that one. Okay, then we're going to shift gears from our winners bracket into our kind of winners consolation bracket, which is where the two teams that lost last week are going to face off. So this week it's going to see Bob's Burgers taking on Destinooooo. And we'll show you how that's shaping up. Okay, so we have, starting with our QBs, we have Jared Goff in Detroit taking on Carolina versus Patrick Mahomes and KC taking on Seattle. Ooh. Honestly, this one might be crazy, but I'm probably going to eat my words on this one, but I think Goff might have the better stat line here, only because, again, I think the weather's going to play a huge factor in this. I think you might see more runs and more small little check down passes in that KC Seattle game than you will, whereas Detroit, Jared's got all those weapons. They're going to be in Carolina, so it should be a bit nicer. It shouldn't be as cold, so we can probably air it out. I say Goff's probably might have the better stat line here. Then in the first set of running backs, we have Najee Harris and Pitt taking on Nick Chubb in Cleveland. This is good. Las Vegas has not been the greatest defense this year, but then again, neither is New Orleans. But I think Najee Harris is probably going to have the better day. Only because the New Orleans run defense is actually pretty stout, despite how banged up that whole team is. Then in the running back 2 spot, we have Jamal Williams in Detroit taking on Carolina versus Josh Jacobs in Las Vegas taking on Pitt. Easy decision here. Josh Jacobs, just being a beast, has been pretty much the only bright spot, well, apart from Tay on that offense, but that team struggled a lot. Josh Jacobs has made it look easy. Then our first set of wide receivers, we have Keenan Allen and the Chargers taking on Indy versus Adam Thielen of Minnesota taking on the Giants. Got to go with Keenan Allen, as Indy is pretty much dead in the water. They blew that huge lead to Minnesota last week. Keenan Allen, another very good wide receiver in the league, who, when healthy, of course. So I don't see why he would not produce bigger than Adam Thielen, who, even though this Minnesota and Giants game might be a bit of a shootout, I still think Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, plus even Delvin Cook, might draw way more targets than Thielen will. Then our next set of wide receiver 2s, we have Christian Kirk in Jacksonville, taking on the Jets, only able to get 5.6 points, while taking on Jerry Jeudy in Denver, going against the Rams. We're going to roll Jerry Jeudy on this one. He produced very well, even with the backup quarterback under center. And with Cortland Sutton, he's just kind of the last man there. Now, if we move into our tight ends, we have TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota taking on the Giants versus Travis Kelce, and the Chiefs taking on Seattle. I bet even with those conditions, Travis Kelce still has the better stat line, just because he is one of those main targets that Mahomes throws to. In our flex spot, we have DJ Chark in Detroit taking on Carolina versus DJ Metcalf, and Seattle taking on KC. Well, Tyler Lockett's going to be out, so I think DK Metcalf might have a slightly better day than DJ Chark, but I'm not going to sleep on DJ Chark. I bet he'll have a pretty good day. Then in the defensive spot, we have the 49ers taking on Washington versus the Ravens taking on Atlanta. I think the Ravens are in a very good spot to produce a very good, this huge stat line here. The Niners taking on a pretty decent Washington team, but don't get me wrong, this 49er defense is no joke. In the kicker battle, we have Justin Tucker and Baltimore taking on Atlanta versus Harrison Butker and KC taking on Seattle. Got to go with Tucker on this one. They're playing, it looks like they're playing in Baltimore, but regardless, it's Justin Tucker. He's just too damn good. And then we go into our losers bracket, our first losers bracket match at least, which is seeing Team Breeki take on the Bajayjays. So now pretty much the two winners from the losers bracket last time are now facing off against each other, and then the two losers are going off against each other. So we'll take at the I guess what do you want to call it, the losers bracket winners, if that makes sense, which is the Bajayjays and Team Breeki. So starting at the top, we have Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, going against the Giants versus Jalen Hurts, and Philly going against Dallas. Jalen Hurts is out, so you got to roll with Cousins. Then if you roll into the running backs, we have Derrick Henry in Tennessee going against Houston versus Cam Akers and the Rams going against Denver. Got to go with Derrick Henry on this one. If you roll into the next set of running backs, we have Alvin Kamara in New Orleans taking on Cleveland versus Aaron Jones in Miami, and Green Bay taking on Miami. I think that actually Aaron Jones might have the better day against Miami. Just not sold on any of that offense there in New Orleans yet. In the first set of wide receivers, we have Michael Pittman Jr. in Indy taking on the Chargers versus Stephon Diggs in Buffalo taking on Chicago. I think Stephon Diggs is definitely going to produce the better stat line. Moving straight into the next set of wide receivers, we have Mike Williams and the Chargers taking on Indy versus Devontae Adams and the Raiders taking on Pitt. I'm going to go on a limb and say Mike Williams might just edge out Devontae Adams this week, just because it's the Raiders. You don't know what version of them you're going to get. Then in the tight ends, we have Gerald Everett and the Chargers taking on Indy versus Pat Freiermuth and Pittsburgh taking on Las Vegas. I'm going to roll with Gerald Everett on this one. Just think that matchup against Indy is just too nice right now. In the flex spot, we have Kenneth Walker, who we'll just assume that he's going to play, goes against in Seattle, takes on Kansas City versus Allen Robinson, who's on IR, so Kenneth Walker gets this one easily. Then in the defenses, we have the Broncos taking on the Rams versus the Bills taking on Chicago. The Bills defense has been known to kind of collapse as of recently, so we'll go with the Broncos throwing up a better stat line against that decimated Rams team. And then in the kickers, we have Cameron Dicker and the Chargers taking on Indy versus Daniel Carlson in Las Vegas taking on Pitt. I think Daniel Carlson marginally will have the better day here. And then in our final matchup, we have the Lame Tanks taking on the Deviants. So starting with our quarterbacks, as always, we have Josh Allen in Buffalo taking on Chicago versus, he has Lamar starting, so we're just obviously have to go with Josh Allen here. Then in the running back ones, we have DeAndre Swift in Detroit taking on Carolina versus Leonard Fournette in Tampa going against Arizona. I'm going to roll the dice on Fournette with this one, even though Swift is healthy. He's just pretty much in a running back by committee there, it seems like. Then in RB2, we have J.K. Dobbins in Baltimore going against Atlanta versus Miles Sanders in Philly going against Dallas. I'm going to take a guess that J.K. Dobbins will have the better day here because that Atlanta team is a little bit worse, while Sanders is going against a stout Dallas defense. In the wide receiver matchup ones, we have Amari Cooper in Cleveland taking on New Orleans versus Robert Woods in Tennessee going against Houston. I think Amari Cooper is going to produce the better stat line. Robert Woods has just been too up and down, mostly down this season. So even though I think he might be one of the main targets there, I just think that Amari Cooper is going to have more points. Then in the next matchup of wide receivers, do you have DJ Moore in Carolina taking on Detroit versus George Pickens in Pittsburgh taking on Las Vegas. This is a tough one. Might have to go DJ Moore on this one, even though George Pickens is a nice touch. I think that Deontay Johnson is coming back from injury as well, which is going to eat into his target share for sure. Then in the tight ends, we have George Kittle and San Fran taking on Washington versus Hunter Henry and New England taking on Cincy. Gotta roll with Kittle as he's like one of the main focal points on that San Fran team. Hunter Henry, he used to be that dude on the Chargers, hasn't really been the same on New England, but yeah, definitely gotta roll with Kittle. Then in the flex spot, we have Devin Singletary and Buffalo taking on Chicago versus Michael Gallup and Dallas taking on Philly. Ooh, this is a close one, but I think Michael Gallup might put up a marginally better stat line. In the defenses, we have the Packers taking on the Dolphins while the Rams are taking on Denver. Oof. I think I'd probably take the Packers, but this one might be pretty even, unfortunately. Then we have Matt Gay in our Battle of the Kickers. We have Matt Gay and the Rams taking on Denver versus Tyler Bass and Buffalo taking on Chicago. I think Tyler Bass for Buffalo there might be some drives where they stall out, but just within field goal range. I think actually that does it. Shocking, isn't it? So, real quick, we covered what happened in the first round of the playoffs. We didn't have to cover any sort of power rankings because, quite frankly, they don't matter anymore now that we're in the playoffs. Then we just dove straight into what round 2 was looking like and kind of gave our picks. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out for this very special playoff episode of Fantasy Haus Live. I hope you guys have a happy holiday and stay safe. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Stay safe. Much love as always. And I'll see you next time. Be sure, by the way, to like, comment, and subscribe in the video if you'd be so kind. Additionally, you can also share it out to your friends, family, to see what other people think about my weird fantasy advice here for our league. Other than that, you guys are amazing. I'll see you later. Bye.